From WCCO Television, a new kind of news program, Newsday, with Marcia Fleur and Dave Nimmer.
Since April 23rd. That's when new federal rules took effect that banned smoking on domestic flights that last less than 2 hours. Northwest Airlines took it a step further, banning all smoking on all domestic flights. That's just the latest round in the struggle between smokers and non-smokers' rights.
And today, the forces opposed to smoking gained some new ammunition. The Surgeon General's report that compares nicotine to cocaine and heroin when it comes to addiction. Surgeon General C. Everett Koop made that comparison this morning as he called for a nationwide campaign to stop smoking.
Our nation has mobilized enormous resources to wage a war on drugs, illicit drugs. We should also give priority to the one addiction, tobacco addiction, that is killing more than 300,000 Americans each year.
Koop said he would like to see a new warning label on tobacco products warning about the dangers of addiction.
And all of that is sure to fire up the debate about where it's proper to light up, and that's what brings our next guest to town. His name is David Brenton. He is the president of the Smokers' Rights Alliance. They challenge the government's smoking rules, and specifically, they challenge Northwest Airlines rules.
David, thank you.
Thank you for coming. David, where is it written anywhere on anybody's tablet that anybody has a right to smoke?
Well, we think that probably the closest place you're going to find that is in the very opening sentences of the United States Constitution. All citizens are guaranteed life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Smoking makes some people happy, and we think that there's a great deal that is covered by that, and we've lost sight of that whole point of view.
When you talk about fighting the airline, David, how in the world are you going to do that? You're going to sue the airlines?
Well,
you're going to write letters to the airlines?
You bet. You bet.
That ain't going to make a difference, is it?
Sure is. Sure is. We think that we can make a tremendous amount of difference. In the years since deregulation, the airlines in this country have gone from serving 285 million passengers a year to 435 million as of last year. A lot of that money is discretionary. A lot of folks are just popping off for a quick weekend someplace because it's easy, it's more available. It's very easy to withhold that money as well. Stay home and play cards. Let's face it, we're talking about an industry that's operating on 0.2% net profit. It's a very fragile industry. They need our business. We can be effective.
I suppose that's true, but let's go back to the Constitution of the United States of America and talk about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Let's talk about life. The Surgeon General says that smoking takes life. If everyone has a right to life, don't non-smokers have a right not to be murdered by smokers?
Well, that's not what the Surgeon General said, though. What the Surgeon General said is that it is taking the lives of 330 million smokers in America. And we think that that's a rather extreme statement, but nonetheless, 50,000 Americans die in automobiles every year. Should we then ban the use of automobiles because it might save lives? There are trade-offs in every situation, and quite frankly, people are quite willing to go and pay the dollars to buy a pack of cigarettes and consume them.
Well, let us tell you, David, that earlier today we talked to someone from the Minnesota Association of Non-Smokers who had, as you might expect, an opposing point of view.
Oh, sure.
Smokers have all the same rights that everybody else does, but one of those does not include the right to pollute the air that everybody has to breathe. Probably most airlines will just come around to banning it. Most of the people who fly are non-smokers. As far as smokers go, most of them don't want to harm other people with their smoke. It's like a movie theater. They know they can't smoke while they're watching a movie, therefore it just doesn't, at least from what I've heard from them, it doesn't bother them.
The question becomes one of secondary smoke. How do we know that that's harmless, or that secondary smoke isn't harmful to those of us sitting on an airplane while you smoke?
Oh, actually, I think some of the best evidence that exists is in the Surgeon General's report in 1986, entitled The Health Consequences of Involuntary Smoking. The Surgeon General has said in public and in his non-official statements, like in the Reader's Digest and so forth, some very, very scary things about environmental tobacco smoke. Unfortunately, it's not contained within the document itself. And we urge people to get a copy of the Surgeon General's report and read it for themselves. He presents the best case he can make that environmental tobacco smoke is causing lung cancer in non-smokers. And he presents 13 studies, the best that science could bring forward at the time. 6 say yes, 7 say no. That's not overwhelming or conclusive. If it were really right on, it should be 13 for 13, and there should be laboratory science to back it up. This is a smoke screen. It is part of a malicious, and quite frankly, malicious campaign to force smokers to quit. This is America. We're not the land of the social engineers. If people want to quit, we say, go for it. If they don't want to quit, no government entity should be allowed to bludgeon them into submission.
Can you see a day when you quit, give them up? Saying...
Perhaps, if I feel so motivated internally. But frankly, if you're not internally motivated, you're never going to quit anyway. You gotta wanna.
Well, that's enough. We're getting a wrap. You're a fascinating young man.
Thank you.
And you're not a hysteric, and you have a point of view, and I'm glad we listened to it.
Well,
yeah, thank you.
On Primetime News this Tuesday, the Senate begins debate on the fate of a major superpower's arms treaty. Also, a Minnesota couple gets their day in court against the maker of a controversial birth control device. Controversy is brewing near Farmington, Minnesota over the proposed building of a religious temple. Is that the
building you want to use?
And in Minneapolis, an education experiment to help students learn better. Details coming up next.
From the Twin Cities, this is the Upper Midwest first look at tonight's news. This is Primetime News.
Well, smokers are starting to fight back, and their latest target is the new ban on smoking on flights less than 2 hours in length. The Smokers' Rights Alliance is setting up booths in airports across the country, passing out what they call a passport to smokers' rights. The packet includes instructions on how to write letters of complaints to senators and congressmen. The group says that there will be at the Minneapolis-St. Paul airport for the next several weeks.
Newton had this law, you know, for every action is an equal and opposite reaction. Well, we've been kind of pressurizing a spring in this country, pushing down on smokers, and eventually there will be a backlash. I think that Minnesota looks like it's ready.
Brenton also says that some non-smokers were signing up today as well.
St. Louis police today trying to find out what made a man shoot a woman in South St. Louis and then kill himself.
Also on the south side, firemen battle a blaze in a rail yard.
And for the first time, the Soviets talk about how many of their soldiers have been killed in Afghanistan.
If you've ever thought you may suffer from an allergy, we'll tell you how you can find out for sure.
And our live studio guest will tell us why smokers are okay and should have their side heard.
Channel 4 KMOV TV St. Louis. Now with News at Noon, Robin Smith, Jim Boland, and the News 4 News team. This is News 4 St. Louis Midday.
To smoke or not to smoke? In the workplace, on airplanes, in public buildings, that is the question and the debate. Whether it is nobler to have a smoke-free society.
Our live studio guest believes that smokers are oppressed, and he's doing something about it. He's Dave Brenton, the founder of the Smokers' Rights Alliance, which is establishing a new chapter here in St. Louis today. Dave, welcome to St. Louis. Tell us about what you have planned, something in Lambert Field, I know.
Yes, we're establishing the St. Louis version of our Smokers Information Center, trying to provide folks the tools necessary to really respond to this wave of anti-smoking legislation and regulation around the country. Folks don't know how to write a letter to a congressman or a senator, and we feel it's important that they register their opinion.
May I see your packet? Because that's what you'll be handing out at Lambert Field, and we'll show you. It will only be open on Mondays and Fridays, correct?
Monday mornings and Friday afternoons.
What do people learn from reading through this packet? If they're smokers, how do they learn how to defend their rights, not be oppressed?
Well, I think the most important thing they learn is to understand a lot of the underlying issues, the background on how the smoking ban came into effect on the airlines, and how many of our senators and representatives don't know how we feel. I mean, we're 55 million Americans. We're voters, taxpayers, responsible citizens, and we have a right to be heard.
But you're in the minority.
Well, certainly we're a minority in numerics, but the bottom line here is that the anti-smoking organizations in this country represent a very small number of people. Most folks are perfectly content to live and let live.
Is there some happy medium here that can be struck between your organization and the anti-smoker people?
Well, I think so, but I think that the happy medium lies someplace more closely with the society we saw a few years ago, where the free market system was bringing about the changes that people wanted. We've seen smoking and non-smoking sections in restaurants, and we've seen smoking and non-smoking sections in airplanes, and so on and so on. That was a response to a free market drive. I mean, people said, we want this, and the business people responded, provided what they wanted.
Okay, argue for me against C. Everett Koop, who says smokers are addicted to nicotine, just like cocaine addicts.
Well, I've got a lot of trouble with that because I've never heard of a cigarette smoker shooting someone in order to get their next fix. It seems very, very extreme. And if it's truly the case, then we must not have a very, very big problem with drugs in America. It's contradictory. Well, certainly we've got a problem with drugs. We don't have a problem with responsible citizens using a legal product.
Smoking causes cancer. Argue that one.
You know, well, the numbers, this is a statistics game, and I guess that the best defense is look at the true numbers and realize that only 1 in 10 smokers ever contracts any of the so-called smoking-related diseases. We don't know what the causes of cancer are. The EPA, some of the best authorities in the world, said that in the public press innumerable times. We just don't know what those mechanisms are. And if we blindside ourselves with this kind of a game and say, we finally found the thing, we stop looking for the real answers. We think that's not the right thing to do.
Dave Brenton, our guest from the Smokers Alliance. Smokers have rights, he says, and they're opening a new chapter in St. Louis. Thanks, Dave, for being with us.
Thank you.
Thanks a million.
Channel 4 News presents Point of View, a 30-minute discussion of public affairs with people in the news.
Good morning. Thanks for joining us today on Point of View. I'm Walter Evans. In recent weeks, we have seen a federal ban on smoking instituted on airline flights of less than 2 hours duration. And we have even seen one airline, Northwest, ban smoking on all of its flights. On the other hand, we have seen locally efforts to establish an airline strictly for smokers. Well, what's going on here? What we're seeing is, in effect, a government-sanctioned revolt of non-smokers who want to breathe air that does not contain tobacco smoke. And we're also seeing an embryonic uprising by America's smokers. That's about 30% of the population, according to our figures. We're seeing them begin to rise up and demand what they see as their rights. Well, one group at the forefront of this kind of reaction is a group called the Smokers' Rights Alliance Incorporated. It's headquartered in Phoenix, Arizona, and its founder and president is our guest today on Point of View. Dave Brenton is an engineer from Phoenix, and we're going to find out just from him just what's going on in this anti-smoking regulation environment and what the Smokers' Rights Alliance is all about, and we'll do that in just a moment. Our guest on Point of View this morning is Dave Brenton of Phoenix, Arizona. Dave is the co-founder and president of Smokers' Rights Alliance Incorporated. Well, Dave, tell us about Smokers' Rights Alliance Incorporated, how it came to be.
Well, first I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to be here. Smokers' Rights Alliance is a national membership organization, kind of by accident. We didn't intend or really set out to become a national organization, but the word has gotten out that we exist and we keep growing, so we're not going to fight it. We're a nonprofit organization dedicated to the principle that individuals have rights and have the right to self-determination, a right to make some of their own choices. And in the arena of the current wave of anti-smoking laws, we see people's not only their rights, but in some cases their livelihoods being taken away from them because they choose to consume tobacco. And we don't believe that that's the sort of principle upon which this nation was founded.
Livelihoods?
Sure. We're seeing people denied jobs because they choose to smoke. We're seeing companies now saying that if you continue to smoke, you can't work for us. You must stop. We're seeing companies like the Palm Harbor mobile home people saying, if you don't quit smoking, you can't participate in our health plan. Very peculiar things that simply don't seem right, especially when they deal with behavior of people away from work. I mean, after all, employers rent our time. They don't own our bodies.
But in the specific instance you mentioned a moment ago, the Palm Harbor mobile homes, there is an economic factor here insofar as that health plan is concerned.
That's the allegation, but it's an interesting allegation because we don't know of a health insurance company in America that has ever figured out a way to clearly set aside smoking and non-smoking rates for health insurance coverage. There's been one, I think, that tried, but the problem is that there's no clear line of demarcation. You tell your people to sign an affidavit swearing to the fact that they do or do not consume tobacco. Well, see, the problem with those kinds of differentiations is that, you know, when an insurance company for automobiles says under 25 or over 25, that's an easy, clear line of demarcation. The problem they're going to run into with this kind of a deal is that there's no way to prove it, and there will be lots and lots of confusion and litigation. The other more important problem, though, is that it really does discriminate, particularly against the blue-collar worker who tends to smoke to a greater extent than do the white-collar workers. We don't think that's fair.
Was there a straw that broke the camel's back, as far as you were concerned, that pushed you over the edge to force you to create this organization?
Well, I think it was really a series of events, no one specific thing, but rather a sudden awakening to the fact that the anti-smoking movement had gone from the campaign of trying to talk smokers into giving it up to developing the attitude that you better quit or else, and we're going to figure out ways to force you to quit. And that's really the tone that it's taken, and the way I realized that or came to the understanding was in our metropolitan area, many of the communities have passed laws, and we didn't really understand the impact of them, didn't hear much squawk about it. And then it came to our own backyard, and it affected my wife's business directly, and I got a chance to read one of these ordinances, and I was horrified. We're talking about the government stepping in and dictating precisely down to the dotted I's and crossed T's how you're going to operate your business in this area, without any input to speak of from the general populace. They didn't make any issue out of it. They just marched down there and said, we're going to do this, and it's done. And they're ridiculous and inflexible rules. They don't really deal with the reality. I mean, certainly people have somehow managed to get along together, smokers and non-smokers, for literally decades, hundreds of years in this country. All of a sudden, we need these restrictive and repressive regulations to interfere with the private business person. I don't think it makes any sense.
Smokers and non-smokers may have gotten along for decades, but the non-smokers haven't been particularly happy about it. They've just been quiet about it.
Oh, I hear that allegation made a lot. But, you know, frankly, I think that the vast majority, in my experience, the vast majority of our non-smoking friends really aren't concerned about the issue. I think that the airline pilot survey that was done last spring kind of illustrates that. They did a study dealing with a lot of airplane passenger issues, and they wanted to find out how the folks that they're serving were feeling about the airline business. And they asked the question, do you think the system we have now of segregating smokers and non-smokers is fair and respects the rights of everybody? 87% of the respondents said yes. That's really the truth. The vast majority of Americans either don't care or are perfectly content with the way things are. And it's a very small percentage of the population who are insisting that we modify the society to suit their needs. The real problem with that is once you start that trend, where do you stop? We've got lots of people with their own private agendas. They know better than everybody else how the world ought to be operated. Do we empower the tiny minority to control the majority to suit their whims, or do we look this thing straight in the eye and recognize that maybe the problems weren't problems in the first place?
But you see, nobody is trying to regulate, except perhaps for this a handful of industries that say you can't smoke either on or off the job. Nobody's trying to regulate what you and your fellow smokers do.
Oh, I disagree. I disagree completely.
They're not telling you that you cannot smoke.
No,
they're telling you just don't smoke around non-smokers.
Well, but see, that's the interesting myth in this whole campaign, because while that is the statement that the anti-smoking lobby makes in public, in their own private newsletters, Action on Smoking and Health in particular, make it quite clear that the purpose of this legislation, especially workplace controls, has nothing to do with the health of their co-workers. It is in primary intent is to help encourage the extinction of smoking behavior and to make it a little more difficult for people to consider taking it up. If that's the primary objective, that's clearly wrong. That's social engineering and government-sponsored social engineering. So that's not what America's supposed to be about.
Well, the government sponsors anti-drug campaigns, anti-DWI campaigns. Why shouldn't the government sponsor campaigns to influence people to quit a habit that is clearly damaging to their health?
The point is that you do that through education. You don't do it through extortion. And that's really where we're at now. We are seeing people whose livelihoods are being threatened. And you see, I'm fortunate. I'm a clever guy, and I've been able to figure out how to do other things than work for corporate America on my own as a private individual and find my way to make my own livelihood. My wife and I do okay for ourselves. We're not getting rich, but we're happy. But there are a lot of folks who have limited skills who can't speak out, who need the job that they have, and they're just as angry about this, but they're finding that the alternatives are closing down to them. And if they don't do like the man says and smoke only here, and pretty soon tomorrow don't smoke at all, otherwise you can't work for us, where is their power to react? Well, that's why the organization exists. They need a voice, someone to speak for them, because this is manipulation. And it's manipulation at the hands of people who are misusing science to try to impose their view of the world on everybody else.
Your group is called the Smokers' Rights Alliance. I assume that is a logo of some sort there on your lapel. Maybe we can get a shot of it.
I decided some time ago that it would be really nice to have some kind of a response to this ever-present international no-smoking symbol. And I commissioned my brother to design something, and this is what he came up with. We are now using this as one of our primary fundraising vehicles. It turns out that folks like this little guy here, and they like our coffee cups and T-shirts and baseball caps and so forth.
I see a cigarette between the pointer finger and the middle finger, and the
gesture is okay.
And the gesture is okay. Right. Smoking is okay.
Right. It's okay for the smoker to make the choice. And the real point was, you know, we've got very vicious and nasty don't smoke here signs. Let's have some friendly ones that say, well, no, smokers are welcome here, because we are people too. And we spend money, and we vote, and we do all kinds of things. We participate in the society, and we're valuable folks, and we shouldn't be limited in our degree of freedom by a handful of folks who don't understand what it is that. I think a lot of the anti-smoking movement has actually bought in to a lot of mythology, and they don't realize that we don't want to be helped against our will. You know, and I don't think any person will ever be bludgeoned out of a behavior or bludgeoned into a new one. People got to make up their own minds about their own lives, and they usually do. And when they make decisions, they usually make them for good.
Dave, we need to take a break. Sure. We'll be back in just a moment. We're talking with Dave Brenton. Dave is the co-founder and president of the Smokers' Rights Alliance. Dave, we were talking about the patch there on your lapel, and you said there's so many no smoking here signs, it would be nice to have this to say, in effect, smoking is welcome here. Where on earth would you post such a sign if it were possible?
Well, I think that it'd be a great thing to have in any restaurant where the smoking section is clearly visible. That's one of the things that we really find troubling. I mean, we've got a lot of laws and even just commercial business practices, policies that set aside smoking and non-smoking sections. But there's very little effort made to make sure that people understand where those lines of demarcation are. I've seen some people get very irate who misunderstood where the non-smoking or smoking sections were. Something like this might help that, help make it a little more clear to people where those are. And certainly, I think we'd be delighted if it showed up in some of the airport smoking sections and gave people a little bit of a grin, a little more positive feeling, because we see folks isolated in these areas, and they're really being treated by these rules as if they're animals on display. You crowd all these folks into a little tiny postage stamp smoking area and say, now you stand over there, you be good. It's a humiliating activity. It is intentionally humiliating, we think, is to just shove folks into the smallest possible space and make them look like they're doing something wrong. And it does another bad thing that simply, from a technical standpoint, doesn't make sense. It overloads ventilation systems. They're designed for when they're working right anyway, for various kinds of environmental contaminants, if you will, and I use the expression loosely, to be distributed out over a wide area of space, not all crunched up into one little place.
You still haven't addressed what seems to me to be the central issue here. Why should non-smokers be forced to breathe the secondary smoke coming out of smokers?
Well, I don't think anybody should be forced to do anything, and I don't think that that's what we're all about. But we have to recognize that somehow, before all these laws came along, folks managed to make do.
Folks managed because non-smokers just didn't put up much of a fuss.
Well, it doesn't seem like that could be the case when we address and look at the enthusiasm and in some case outright zealotry of the anti-smoking crusaders who are at work today. I don't know what it was that kept them quiet. I don't think that anything would have kept them quiet. I think that they're true believers and they would have fought for what it is that they wanted. I think that the whole point is, if we look at the anti-smoking movement carefully, we'll see that for a long time, their interest was to persuade smokers to stop. Then someplace in the middle 70s, they invented this new thing, this environmental tobacco smoke, as this health issue that we're going to deal with. And now, the reason smokers should quit smoking is because they're hurting their people that live around them, work around them, their families. Great trick. Because if you get people to buy into the idea that they're actually hurting other human beings, they will start to think about it more seriously. But the problem is that they have never been able to produce conclusive evidence that that's the case. Even the Surgeon General's report, and we wish people would get it and read what's inside. Forget about what Surgeon General Koop says in the popular press. He's not responsible to the scientific community when he writes for Reader's Digest. He can say whatever he wants. But look at the body of the evidence within that document, and you're going to see that the best case they had was supposed to be the case against smoking, environmental tobacco smoke causing lung cancer in normal people. They brought 13 case studies to the fore. 6 of those 13, by their reckoning, support the allegation. If this was absolutely provable science, it should be 13 for 13, no question about it. And it's also interesting to note that very qualified biostatisticians have looked at all this information and said, wait a minute, this is 1980. These are the 80s. Where is the modern epidemiological method? How come you guys haven't used all the right method? There's only one study out of the 13 that uses state-of-the-art method. And its results are not consistent with either conclusion. They could have just as easily been produced by chance. There is no unequivocal evidence, no matter what anybody says. We're dealing with a war of words. We're dealing with people who have a strong moral conviction that smoking is just no good for people, and they're trying every way they can to convince America to help them convince us, to force us to stop. Well, that's not right. And it's certainly not going to work. We will quit when we're good and ready to, I'll bet you. That's the way Americans are. We're stubborn folks.
Well, are you arguing then with the overall thesis that smoking is dangerous to one's health?
That's not our issue. If it is, and certainly the statistics make it look that way, fine, so be it. But then again, driving your automobile has a certain element of risk involved. You get in your car, you stand some statistical possibility of not arriving at your destination.
You aren't comparing apples and oranges.
No, not at all. Not at all. You've got a lifetime potential risk of dying in an automobile accident.
But
just
you
like
have to ride in a car. You don't have to smoke.
No, you don't have to ride in an automobile. This is America. There are lots and lots of possibilities. There are people who decide they don't want to live in cities. They don't want to deal with cars. We're talking about a society where people make freely choices. And we have all bought into the idea that we're helpless victims of the system. That's not true. We make every choice about everything we do every day. And if we don't like the world we live in, then it's our responsibility to change it, but not to change everyone else that lives in it. I don't buy the excuse that we have to do this or we have to do that. Everybody makes their own choices. They can get out of bed in the morning or they cannot. But if we're going to try to create a risk-free society, then it's not even safe to stay in bed, because something can go wrong there. You can be sick. You can die. Life, unfortunately, is a terminal condition. We're all going to go out of it one way or another. And I think the idea that if we can eliminate all this risk, somehow we'll become immortal is the underlying trick in the whole argument. We can't be rid of all the risks. And if we're going to deal with the risks, let's deal with the real ones, the important ones, the big ones, the scary ones. Like we've got a disease on the loose in America and the whole world called AIDS. We need to figure out how to solve that problem. It could be very, very damaging to the world population. Yet Surgeon General Koop says that environmental tobacco smoke is public enemy #1. What about all this air pollution that we're dealing with every day? Automobiles. We've got to solve some of these problems.
We are trying.
Well, but you see, we haven't turned it into the death threat that these folks have created out of environmental tobacco smoke. And the fact of the matter is that it's thousands of times more dangerous to everyone, everywhere, to live in a metropolitan community with the kinds of levels of exhaust products that come out of these cars. And the scientific community is starting to really discover how closely related that element is to pulmonary dysfunction and a lot of the things that are supposed to be not happening to normal people, but they do. And what about radon? The folks at the Environmental Protection Agency did a study last year, and if their estimates are correct, 10,000 people in America, for sure, are dying every year because of being exposed to radon in their homes. That's a big number, but we're not doing anything to solve that.
Dave, we need to take one final break. Back in a moment. Dave, what exactly are you trying to get your members to do?
Well, I think the most important thing for them to do is to recognize that this is not a lost cause like everybody's telling us. The only reason that the progress that has been made, in our view, is because we have all failed to be involved in the political process. Our elected officials only know what they hear, and if they don't hear from us, they don't know that we don't feel that this is a good idea, that we don't agree with the anti-smoking crusade taking away every one of our choices. And so if we get involved, write those letters, make those phone calls, let those folks know how we truly feel, and to encourage our non-smoking friends who recognize that this has gone too far to get involved as well, we can make a big difference. This can be stopped.
Are there many non-smoking friends who agree with your position?
Absolutely. 20% of our members, dues-paying members, are non-smokers. They understand that this is an individual rights issue, that it could just as easily be folks coming around telling you that you can't drink coffee around me because I might be affected by the caffeine that's in it. The argument is just as strong, just as rational, just as scientific. It just happens to be garbage.
You don't breathe caffeine.
Well, certainly you do. Certainly you do. If you set a cup of coffee in this room, and I hadn't had a cup of coffee in a month, and we sat here for this half hour, we could come and do a blood test, and you could detect caffeine levels in my blood. That's the level of science we're at. That's how good our instrumentality is. It doesn't mean that it's hurting me one whit, but we could measure it, and that's what we're dealing with. We're dealing with the infinitesimal and a lot of scary-sounding names. You know, we say scary-sounding chemical names. We don't bother to mention the amounts we're dealing with are virtually immeasurable.
To what extent does the tobacco industry, the Tobacco Institute specifically, support your work?
Well, we're not in a supportive situation. We are in a collaborative situation on the airline issue. We have known of one another, obviously, for a long time, and the Institute and the entire tobacco industry has been very, very arm's length because they recognize that an organization that truly represents tobacco consumers is first sorely needed. We are doing something that needs to be done, speaking up for ourselves, and because the antis always allege that organizations of this kind wouldn't exist if it wasn't for the help of the Institute or some other organization. So we want to make that clear. Now, a couple of months ago, we were having some discussions with the Institute, and they said, what do you think about this airline thing? And I said, well, it's a pretty sad situation. We really need to work on it. And they said, well, would you like to team up and work on this one? We would provide you with some assistance in the form of public relations counsel and some transportation to get you around and let you get the message out. Well, I consulted with the board of directors, and we said, well, that sounds fine. Let's do it, because we need to get together on this thing. So that's our relationship.
But no money.
No money. No.
Dave, you have an 800 number. If anyone who's interested in contacting you can use that number, which is?
It's 800-562-7444. But I recommend folks just call up that 800 information is the best way to find us.
All right. Well, Dave, I'm not sure whether I wish you good luck or not, but I respect your efforts.
Thank you.
Appreciate you being with us.
Thank you for the opportunity.
We've been talking with Dave Brenton. Dave is co-founder and president of Smokers' Rights Alliance, headquartered in Phoenix, Arizona. Thank you for being with us on Point of View.
Point of View is a presentation of Channel 4 News.
And welcome back to Midday. Today we're going to talk about rights, specifically the rights of smokers and the rights of non-smokers. On April 23, 1988, domestic flights of 2 hours or under by federal law were made non-smoking flights. And Northwest Airlines followed that up with a ban on smoking on all of their flights. Dave Brenton, I'd like to introduce you. First of all, he is on my right, and he represents a national group called Smokers' Rights Alliance. And on my left is Dr. Ned Collage, and he is a cancer researcher at the AMC Cancer Research Center. And we're going to talk about this issue today. Begin, if you will, Dave, by telling us a little bit about this national group and then the focus on the ban on smoking on flights.
Well, Smokers' Rights Alliance is a membership organization that now has members in 35 states. We're approaching 1,000 members. We were formed in January 1987 to deal with smoking control legislation in our part of the country. And we've managed to find a lot of folks around the country who feel the same way we do.
Answering what need, be specifically if you can. What is it smokers are saying now?
Well, I think what we're trying to say is that enough's enough. We're perfectly willing and have been willing to make reasonable concessions to live with smoking and non-smoking sections. That's fine. We're happy with that. But we've conceded to the point now where 55 million Americans are finding themselves more and more on the back porches of America. And that's simply not fair. We're citizens, we're people, we're taxpayers. We just want to be able to get along.
Okay, but now, of course, the question is that people are asking, you are taxpayers, but are you also people who are spreading cancer to other people who don't smoke? And let's turn to Ned and ask that question. What do we know about residual effects of smoking?
Well, the terminology that the Surgeon General has coined is what we call involuntary smoking, or smoking that you do because you're around someone that smokes. And there have now been a number of studies that have demonstrated that for at least lung cancer in adults, you do increase your risk by exposing yourself to involuntary smoke. From a basic science standpoint, there's evidence that the smoke that the smoker does not inhale actually contains higher concentrations of the carcinogens that we as physicians worry about.
Ned, let me ask you specifically at this point. I'm on the plane, we're on the flight with Dave, and we're on a 3-hour flight, and Dave is smoking in the smoking section, and I'm sitting above the smoking section because I don't smoke any longer.
Right.
What specifically damage am I incurring through Dave's smoking?
What we try to do, and I'm sure that this is where some of the concern comes, is try to extrapolate down from the dosage you get. And maybe the best thing to do is tell you there is no good dose of an agent that's known to cause cancer, or there's no good dose of carbon monoxide for you to obtain in your bloodstream. And so to say, is there a safe distance, I'll tell you, if you sit well up in front of the smoking section, you're doing better than the people who are one row away, who really get the maximum of this involuntary smoke. But there is a residual that's built up, and I guess my recommendation is, isn't it better to not expose the majority of people to that, not expose them to that smoke, if there is a chance that it could cause cancer, than to allow people to continue with the habit that is harmful to potentially the people around them.
What's the position of the Smoker Rights Alliance on that?
Well, I think that the fundamental argument is very, very simple, and that is that if we're talking about protecting the health of passengers, that nothing has been presented in any of the evidence, including the surveys performed by the review performed by the National Academy of Sciences, to support the idea that reducing that little window of exposure, and let's face it, most folks in America fly less than one time a year, so we're not talking about a lot of exposure. But the fact of the matter is they have demonstrated that there's nothing that indicates that window of exposure is hazardous to normal, healthy human beings.
Of course, the problem that arises is that how long would you have to say? I mean, if that kind of exposure over a lifetime of flights reduces my lifespan by 7 days, or by 2 weeks, or by a month, well, I'm going to have to study that a long time before I can pick that up. Since I know it's already a carcinogen, how can I possibly say that a little bit is okay?
Well, I guess that my response to that is that we feel that the Surgeon General's report that you referred to, the 86 report on titled The Consequences of Involuntary Smoking, is in fact the best evidence for our case, because it presents within the body of that report the 13 studies dealing with lung cancer and in non-smokers that is allegedly linked to environmental tobacco smoke. And the case is clearly made. 6 out of 13 studies support the contention by the Surgeon General's own assessment, and 7 do not.
Actually, that's 11 out of this.
Well, the summary at the end of the chapter says 6 out of 13. I'm quoting the report. And the problem here is that there are some epidemiological specialists, and obviously realize that there are areas of the science that deserve some criticism. Potential for bias is not eliminated.
Let me ask you a question again, because not only on flights, but when we go into restaurants, for example, and they have this little division, and on one side you can smoke, and on the other side you can't smoke, and the smoke is going all over the room. Is that really doing anything for us, for the people that want to be protected from the residual effects of smoking? Is that, or are we fooling ourselves?
Well, I'd like to again go back to the same report, and the kind of bottom line there was that separation is beneficial. So separation of smokers and non-smokers is beneficial and reduces the risks, but the conclusion was that it does not entirely eliminate the risk.
Let me turn to Dave finally, because this is being taken very seriously. If you're smoking on a flight and an FBI agent could be waiting for you at the gate, you could be fined $1,000. Affects 80% of all the flights, domestic flights in America. What is it that you can do about this?
Well, I think the most important thing we can do is, as smokers, as citizens, as voters, it's time we let our elected officials know how we feel. The small anti-smoking minority who have lobbied hard and spent big dollars to get such laws in place in this country have misrepresented their side as representing the majority of view. The fact of the matter is that
we're people too, and we ought to let our folks know.
Well, I hope we've been able to disseminate information from both sides of the issue on Midday today, and Midday will continue in just a minute.